This is Down the Rabbit Hole, where we question the mysteries and nature of reality. I'm your host, Justin Perry. Teleportation is a topic that is often looked at as science fiction or folklore. But throughout history, there have been recorded incidents where teleportation seems to have actually taken place. People have also reported objects teleporting from one place to another. This is a compilation of such stories.
The case of Gil Perez. One of the most famous cases of spontaneous teleportation occurred in 1593 when a man named Gil Perez was working as a guard at the governor's palace in Manila, Philippines. One day, Perez suddenly found himself in Mexico City, over 9,000 miles away from his post. According to Perez, he had been standing guard one moment and the next he was in a plaza in Mexico City. Confused and disoriented, Perez was arrested by local authorities for deserting his post. However, when word of Perez's sudden appearance in Mexico City reached the governor of Manila, it was confirmed that Perez had indeed been on duty at the palace when he disappeared. Despite numerous investigations, no explanation for Perez's teleportation has ever been found. The story of Sriman Narayana. Sriman Narayana was a holy man in India who was said to have the ability to teleport. According to the legend, he was able to transport himself and his followers from one location to another instantaneously. One of the most famous stories about Sriman Narayana involves his teleportation from India to Mecca in order to perform the Hajj pilgrimage. The story is still told today as a testament to the power of faith and devotion. The Tale of the Green Children of Woolpit. The Green Children of Woolpit were two children who allegedly appeared in the village of Woolpit in England in the 12th century. According to the story, the children had green skin and spoke a language that was unknown to the villagers. They claimed to have come from a place called St. Martin's Land, which was said to be a subterranean world. The children were eventually baptized and learned to speak English, but they never spoke about how they came to be in Woolpit. Some have speculated that they may have teleported from another dimension or time. The vanishing of Ettore Majorana. Ettore Majorana was an Italian physicist who disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1938. Majorana was known for his work on the theory of neutrinos, and some believe that he may have been working on a device or technique that would allow for teleportation. Some have speculated that he may have successfully teleported himself to another dimension or time. The disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce was a famous American writer and journalist who disappeared without a trace in 1913. One of the theories about his disappearance is that he may have teleported to another dimension or time. Bierce was known for his interest in the supernatural and the occult, and some believe that he may have had access to a device or technique that allowed him to teleport. Another well-documented case of spontaneous teleportation occurred in 1905 when a woman named Mary Reynolds suddenly vanished from her home in Croydon, England. Reynolds' disappearance was witnessed by her husband and daughter, who reported seeing her simply disappear into thin air. After an exhaustive search, Reynolds was eventually found over 20 miles away in a town called Harrow. According to Reynolds, she had no memory of how she got there and had simply found herself wandering the streets of Harrow, confused and disoriented. In 1974, the famous spoonbender Uri Geller claimed to have teleported himself from the United States to Israel in a matter of seconds. Geller, who is known for his supposed psychic abilities, claimed that he had been in New York City one moment and then suddenly found himself in Tel Aviv. Geller's claims were met with skepticism from many quarters, but he maintained that he had indeed teleported himself across the world. This isn't the first time Uri teleported. The first time was actually witnessed by 4 other people. In 2006, the famous Dr. Masaru Emoto claimed to have witnessed a group of people teleporting themselves across a room during an experiment in Tokyo, Japan. According to Emoto, the experiment involved a group of people holding hands and focusing their thoughts on a specific location in the room. Suddenly, several members of the group disappeared and reappeared in the designated location, leaving the others stunned and amazed. Emoto documented the experiment with photographs and video footage. The footage has since been removed from social media. In 2013, a man named David Booth claimed to have teleported himself from his home in the United Kingdom to a location in Spain. According to Booth, he had been practicing meditation and visualization techniques for several years when he suddenly found himself in a Spanish garden surrounded by unfamiliar plants and flowers. Booth claimed that he was able to explore the garden for several minutes before being transported back to his home in the UK. While these accounts of spontaneous teleportation may seem incredible, they are not without precedent. In recent years, scientists have begun to explore the possibility of teleportation through quantum entanglement, a phenomenon in which particles can become linked in such a way that their states become intrinsically linked regardless of the distance between them. In 1968, a woman named Eileen Lenner claimed to have teleported from her home in New York to a location in Philadelphia. According to Lenner, she had been sitting in her living room when she suddenly felt a strange sensation and found herself in a different room, surrounded by unfamiliar people. After a few minutes, Lenner was returned to her own home, where she was left feeling confused and disoriented. In 1977, a man named K.B. Kameshwar claimed to have teleported from his home in India to a location in the United States. According to Kameshwar, he had been meditating in his room when he suddenly found himself in a park in Texas. Kameshwar claimed that he was able to explore the park and interact with several people before being transported back to his home in India. In 1981, a man named Al Bielek claimed to have teleported from the year 2137 to the year 1943. According to Bielek, he had been part of a secret government project known as the Philadelphia Experiment, which was said to have involved attempting to make a U.S. Navy destroyer invisible to radar. Bielek claimed that during the experiment, he and several other crew members were accidentally transported through time to the year 1983. After spending several years in the future, Bielek claimed that he was transported back to the year 1943, where he was eventually able to resume his life. In 2014, a person named Lorena Garcia claimed to have teleported from her home in Spain to a parallel universe. According to Garcia, she had been driving to work when she suddenly found herself on a different road, surrounded by unfamiliar buildings and landmarks. Garcia claimed that she was able to interact with people in the parallel universe before eventually being transported back to her own reality. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were walking in the woods. Suddenly, they found themselves in a completely different part of the forest, even though they had not walked that far. The user was disoriented and had no idea how they got there. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were driving on the highway. They saw a bright light in the sky and suddenly found themselves on a different stretch of road, even though they had not taken any turns. The user was so disoriented that they had to pull over and collect themselves. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were swimming in a lake. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different part of the lake, even though they had not swam that far. The user was so disoriented that they had to swim back to shore and take a break. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were walking down the street. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different city altogether, even though they had not left their neighborhood. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask for directions back to their own city. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were sitting in their living room. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different room in their house, even though they had not moved from the couch. The user was so disoriented that they had to check to make sure no one else was in the house. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were hiking in the mountains. Suddenly, they found themselves at the top of the mountain, even though they had not climbed that far. The user was so disoriented that they had to sit down and catch their breath. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were on a plane. Suddenly, the plane disappeared and they found themselves in a completely different location, even though they had not landed. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask the nearest person for help. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were at a train station. Suddenly, they found themselves on a train, even though they had not bought a ticket or boarded the train. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask the conductor for help. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were walking down the street. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different city altogether, even though they had not left their neighborhood. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask for directions back to their own city. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were at a park. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different park, even though they had not left the area. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask a passerby for help. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were driving. Suddenly, they found themselves on a different road, even though they had not turned or taken any exits. The user was so disoriented that they had to pull over and collect themselves. A Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were at a mall. Suddenly, they found themselves in a completely different store, even though they had not left the store they were in. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask a salesperson for help. Another Reddit user shared a story about teleportation that occurred while they were at a concert. Suddenly, they found themselves in a different section of the venue, even though they had not moved from their spot. The user was so disoriented that they had to ask a security guard for help. A Reddit user shared their experience of glitching in the Matrix while walking to work. They suddenly found themselves in a completely different street, with buildings and shops they had never seen before. Despite feeling disoriented, they continued walking and eventually found their way back to their usual route. This strange occurrence left them questioning the nature of reality and the boundaries of our perception. Another Reddit user shared a story of a glitch they experienced while driving on the highway. They suddenly found themselves transported to a different location with unfamiliar surroundings and a completely different landscape. They felt as if they had traveled through time or space but couldn't explain how or why it had happened. One Reddit user described a glitch they experienced while visiting a foreign country. They were exploring a busy marketplace when suddenly everything around them froze in place. No one was moving, no sound was being made, and they felt completely alone in the frozen world. After a few moments, everything returned to normal, leaving them feeling confused and disoriented. A Reddit user shared their experience of glitching in the Matrix while hiking in a remote area. They suddenly found themselves in a completely different location with unfamiliar terrain and surroundings. They had no memory of how they got there or how much time had passed. This strange occurrence left them feeling uneasy and questioning the nature of reality. Another Reddit user described a glitch they experienced while shopping in a department store. They suddenly found themselves in a different section of the store, with no memory of how they had gotten there. They felt as if they had been transported to a parallel universe or alternate reality. One Reddit user shared a story of a glitch they experienced while walking their dog in a park. They suddenly found themselves in a different part of the park, with no memory of walking there. They felt disoriented and confused, wondering if they had somehow teleported or time-traveled. A Reddit user described a glitch they experienced while sitting in a coffee shop. They suddenly felt as if they were floating above their own body, watching themselves from a distance. They felt disconnected from their physical self and struggled to understand what was happening. Another Reddit user shared a story of a glitch they experienced while watching a live performance. Suddenly, the performers froze in place and the stage went dark. The audience was silent, and the user felt as if they were in a void or empty space. After a few moments, the performance resumed as if nothing had happened, leaving the user feeling confused and disoriented. The disappearing keys. A woman on Reddit shared her experience of losing her keys while out with friends. She searched everywhere but couldn't find them. After giving up, she returned home and found her keys sitting on her bed, even though she was certain she had left them in her purse. The woman's roommate also confirmed that she hadn't seen the keys before they mysteriously appeared on the bed. The vanishing mug. A user on Reddit shared a story about a mug that disappeared from their desk at work. They searched the entire office but couldn't find it. Several weeks later, the mug reappeared on their desk, even though they had not seen it since it vanished. The missing CD. A man on Reddit shared his experience of a CD disappearing from his car. He searched his car thoroughly, but couldn't find it. Later that day, when he returned to his car, the CD was sitting on his passenger seat, the moving tools. A user on Reddit shared a story about their tools randomly moving around their garage. They would put their tools away in a specific spot, only to find them in a completely different location the next day. This continued to happen until they eventually moved to a new house. The disappearing phone. A woman on Reddit shared her experience of losing her phone while out with friends. She searched everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. Later that day, she received a call from her phone, which was found in her car, even though she had not been in her car since she lost it. It is important to note that these stories are just a few examples of reported instances of objects randomly teleporting from one place to another. The authenticity of these stories cannot be verified, and there may be other explanations for the events that occurred. Sure, here are some more reported instances of objects randomly teleporting from one place to another. The appearing candle. A Reddit user shared a story about a candle that appeared in their house. They had never seen it before and had no idea where it came from. They searched the house and asked their roommates if they knew where it came from, but no one had any answer. The candle remained a mystery until it eventually disappeared just as suddenly as it appeared. The disappearing jewelry. A woman on Reddit shared her experience of losing her necklace while on vacation. She searched her hotel room and retraced her steps, but the necklace was nowhere to be found. Later that day, she received a call from the hotel staff informing her that her necklace had been found in the lobby, even though she had not been in the lobby since losing it. The moving toy. A Reddit user shared a story about their son's toy moving on its own. They had put the toy away in a specific location, but the next day they found it in a completely different spot. This continued to happen until they eventually got rid of the toy. The disappearing wallet. A man on Reddit shared his experience of losing his wallet while out at a bar. He searched everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. The next day, he received a call from the bar informing him that his wallet had been found on a table, even though he had searched all the tables the previous night, and it was not there. The vanishing pen. A Reddit user shared a story about a pen that disappeared from their desk. They searched their entire office, but it was nowhere to be found. Several days later, the pen reappeared on their desk, even though they had not seen it since it vanished. Sure, here are a few more reported instances of objects randomly teleporting from one place to another. The disappearing book. A woman on Reddit shared her experience of losing a book she had borrowed from the library. She searched her house and car, but it was nowhere to be found. A few weeks later, she received a call from the library informing her that her book had been found in the book drop, even though she had not returned it herself. The moving keys. A Reddit user shared a story about their keys moving on their own. They would put their keys in a specific spot, but the next day they would find them in a completely different location. This happened repeatedly until they eventually moved to a new house. The disappearing ring. A woman on Reddit shared her experience of losing her wedding ring. She searched her house and car, but it was nowhere to be found. Several months later, she found the ring sitting on her dresser, even though she had searched that spot multiple times before. The vanishing knife. A Reddit user shared a story about a knife that disappeared from their kitchen. They searched the entire house, but it was nowhere to be found. Several weeks later, the knife reappeared in the silverware drawer. The disappearing remote. A man on Reddit shared his experience of losing his TV remote. He searched his entire house, but it was nowhere to be found. Several days later, he found the remote sitting on his couch, even though he had searched that spot multiple times before.